Corvin Dax adjusted the black cuffs of his diplomatic coat, the fabric catching the golden glare of the council chamber's overhead flares. The air cracked with shifting bodies and suppressed amusement. "Let the relics speak," someone muttered in a low growl from the upper tiers. Laughter rippled like a blade dragged across glass. Corvin lifted his head, gaze steady. The table before him gleamed with cold blue veins of light, but his focus lay beyond, on the endless semicircular rows of alien delegates, lounging in throne-like seats. Every face, every glinting eye held the same dismissive scorn. He stepped forward without hesitation. His boots clicked against the onyx-tiled floor, the sound sharp against the sluggish murmurs. From the dais, Vecran High Chancellor Cern Valric lounged like a bored god, his scaled hands draped lazily over the carved arms of his chair. His third eye, perched in the center of his forehead, closed in exaggerated weariness. When Corvin spoke, his voice carried with a stillness that cut through the mockery. "Humanity acknowledges this gathering," he said, the words shaped by years of discipline. "We recognize the contributions each species has made to the Concord. We stand for unity." The translator nodes shimmered along the walls, spitting his words into dozens of alien dialects. A low chuckle rolled from the left, thick, wet, full of teeth. Karan dignitaries whispered in their gravelly tongue, bearing fanged grins behind armored visors. Corvin's hands remained folded at his waist. He could feel the disdain prickling against his skin, like invisible thorns. The air tasted of dry minerals, and the heated tang of power converters nearby pulsed against his tongue. Sweat beaded at the back of his neck, but he ignored it. He moved to conclude his address, each word placed like stones across a rising river. A sharp, deliberate laugh tore through the chamber. Cern Valric shifted lazily in his seat, arms wide, voice oozing satisfaction. "Perhaps next time, humans will bring something new to offer, not ancient flags and dying speeches." The laughter that followed was not kind. It rose high into the cathedral-like ceiling, rebounded off cold stone pillars, and washed back in a wave that stung like sand against skin. Corvin let the insult settle. His jaw tightened once, then released. Behind him, the other human delegates, men hardened by years of careful diplomacy, shifted but said nothing. No one glanced at one another. No one rose to leave. Their silence was a single unbroken front. Corvin gave a slight nod, sharp and final. His fingers brushed the folded banner at his side. The Earth seal, centuries old, stitched by hand from the silk of the last Terran moths. Its weight grounded him, heavier than any armor. He offered the room a thin, measured smile. "Humanity endures," he said quietly. The alien counselors barely heard him over their own snickering. A bass rumble sounded as General Varth Marek of the Karan Dominion rose from his place. His boots struck the steps leading to the dais, echoing with a deliberate menace. The towering general approached the Earth Seal banner that hung proudly behind Corvin's table. Without hesitation, Marek ripped it free. The ancient fabric tore with a sound like bones snapping. Marek held it aloft, his tusked mouth twisting into a leer, before throwing it to the ground. He ground it beneath his heavy boot, slow, deliberate. The room exploded in savage glee. Some delegates slapped their thighs, others pounded the railing before them, reveling in the spectacle. Corvin moved. Not fast, not slow, just forward. He crossed the distance between himself and the trampled banner in a few unhurried strides. The lights above cast his shadow long and thin, across the cracked floor, merging with the darkness pooling at the chamber's edges. He crouched without ceremony, gathered the ruined banner into his hands, and folded it as carefully as a burial cloth. The threads clung to his fingers, gritty with dust. The chamber noise died. No speeches, no glares, no threats. Corvin simply rose, adjusted the folds so no tear showed outwardly, and turned his back on the Concord. The human delegation followed, silent as a tide withdrawing from a bloodied beach. Boots scraped stone, doors whispered open, and the humans vanished into the corridors beyond. For a long moment, the council chamber hung in stunned uncertainty. General Marek snorted, amused. High Chancellor Valric leaned back in his throne, waving a dismissive hand, as if brushing away the scent of something unpleasant. "Let them slink home to their little blue rock," Valric said lazily. "The future moves on without them." Delegates laughed again, though a few glanced uneasily at the doorway the humans had disappeared through. Outside, the Verdenes prime wind howled against the gilded towers, carrying with it the sharp bite of oncoming storms. Corvin led his men through the labyrinthine halls, every step echoing with a rhythm older than the stars, the beat of a species that had bent but never broken. In the courtyard beyond the grand hall, drops of acidic rain pattered against the polished stone, sizzling faintly where they struck. Corvin paused under the looming arch, the weight of the folded banner still cradled in his arms. Fleet Admiral Drake Solvar stepped up beside him, rain streaking his dark hair. His voice was low, grim. "Orders, Ambassador." Corvin gazed out over the city, the alien skyline jagged and sharp against the bruised sky. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he breathed in deeply. The air reeked of alien flora and the acrid oil of grav transports, and exhaled slow, measured. "Begin retrieval protocols," he said at last. Solvar nodded once, and disappeared into the rain. Above them, a trio of heavy transports banked sharply across the skyline, laser plasma displays flickering across their undersides in silent signals. Corvin tightened his grip on the banner. The first crack of thunder rolled across Verdenes Prime. In the council chamber far behind them, the laughter faltered, leaving only the faint rustle of shifting bodies, and the subtle, growing sense that something had gone terribly wrong. "You think silence makes you strong?" General Verth Marek's voice crashed through the drizzle like a battering ram. Corvin Dax halted under the arch, turning slowly. Water streamed from the stone ledges, puddling at his boots. The banner, carefully folded against his chest, felt heavier with every heartbeat. Marek strode forward from the council doors, his armor throwing off the rain and steaming rivulets. He didn't bother to hide the derision curling his tusked mouth. Behind him, a gaggle of alien dignitaries filtered out, eager to witness more humiliation. "Walk away, human," Marek snarled, loud enough for the onlookers. His hand gestured crudely toward the banner. "Carry your broken symbol home." Corvin studied him, blinking the wet from his lashes. His face remained impassive, yet the set of his shoulders spoke of tempered strain. The Earth Seal banner sagged slightly in his hands. Marek wasn't finished. He lunged, one massive gauntleted hand slamming into the folded cloth. The blow ripped the fragile silk from Corvin's grip, sending it fluttering to the ground like a wounded bird. Gasps slithered through the crowd, feeding the hungry storm overhead. Marek ground his boot into the banner once more, grinding the fabric into the slick stone. The white threads darkened, soaking up mud and rain, yet Corvin's eyes never left Marek's face. "You bring scraps to a feast," Marek hissed. "You should have stayed silent in your dust heap." Behind Corvin, the human delegation shifted, muscles coiling under thin diplomatic uniforms. No one spoke, no one moved forward. Corvin knelt, the chill of the stone seeped into his knees, and he gathered the banner piece by piece, lifting the sodden cloth, as if retrieving a fallen comrade. The texture rasped against his skin, its once smooth surface torn and ragged under the weight of insult. Around him, alien diplomats laughed, not the explosive jeering of before, but sharp, metallic bursts, slicing the air into bloody ribbons. Corvin rose. Rain dripped from his hair onto the banner, tracing dark lines across the ruined emblem. He turned, no grand gesture, no last glare, just a slow walk toward the waiting transports. The humans fell in behind him, a silent procession disappearing into the rain. Inside the council hall, Varric leaned on the balustrade, watching them go. His third eye opened slightly, gleaming with amusement. Such tender creatures, he mused aloud, loud enough to be heard. Even their pride bleeds too easily. Marek rumbled a satisfied growl. They'll crawl back once their sky turns gray enough. None of them noticed the sharp glance a junior Vecran envoy gave the retreating figures, nor the way his hand hovered uncertainly over the ceremonial blade at his belt. None noticed the cold, coiled certainty in Corvin's retreating form. Out beyond the council walls, the human delegation moved swiftly across the polished courtyard, their steps swallowing the distance to the waiting transports. The transports' laser plasma displays shimmered to life as they approached, casting green and silver data streams into the rain-fogged air. Fleet Admiral Drake Solvar waited by the nearest ramp, his stance rigid, his eyes locked onto Corvin's as the ambassador approached. Corvin passed him without speaking. Inside the main transport, The recycled air smelled faintly of old leather and industrial solvents. The noise of the storm muted as the hatch sealed behind them. Corvin placed the ruined banner across the command console, smoothing it once with the palm of his hand. The touch lingered a second too long. The cabin lights dimmed. Heads-up displays flickered alive across the walls, pulling up the immediate withdrawal vectors. A silent confirmation from Cadric Vaughn, Earth's intelligence director, blinked into view, coordinates encoded in a single line of icy blue. Corvin's voice, when it came, was low and level. Initiate dark protocols. Full continental withdrawal. Solvar keyed the command without hesitation. Engines flared to life, trembling the deck plates beneath their boots. One by one, the human transports lifted into the murky sky, disappearing into the storm belt. No messages, no warnings, just absence. Far below on the ground, the council members watched the transports vanish, laughing and trading sneering bets on how long humans would sulk before crawling back to the table. Inside the lead ship, Corvin remained standing, hand resting lightly on the folded banner. Vaughn's voice crackled over the comms. Signal confirmation from Sol system. Tarn Vaylor requests final authorization. Corvin closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the years pressing down like a mountain. He opened them, gaze sharper than any blade. Tell him, Corvin said, voice razor-thin. Ashfall begins. Outside the rain intensified, hammering the abandoned council tower, with a rage it could no longer recognize. The transport slid between the heavy clouds, running silent, leaving Verdanus Prime behind without a second glance. Down on the cracked stones of the courtyard, the muddy imprint of a crushed earth seal remained, the last thing the conquered would see of humanity, before the skies opened, and history cracked in two. They're gone? The question tumbled from Sub-Commander Vexer's mandibles, half snarled, half disbelieving. Above him, the grand plaza of Verdanus Prime sat empty under a bruised sky, rain streaking through the skeletal towers. Heads-up displays flickered sporadically along the arcades, showing loops of Concord news feeds waiting for updates from Earth's envoys that would never arrive. High Chancellor Volric lounged back in his transport, gnawing on a bitter rootstick, unconcerned. Gone, he said, stretching the word into a sneer. A sulking animal hides after a beating. Vexer's eye ridges twitched. He surveyed the drenched landing platforms where human vessels once clustered in quiet rows. No movement, no lights, just puddles forming in the warped reflections of abandoned steel. Down in the merchant sectors, Concord traders cursed and adjusted stock displays. The humans' rare exports, fast-grown Terran silks, compact grav batteries, and adaptive ceramic shields, disappeared from storefronts like breath on a mirror. Ambassadors from 5 different systems filed grievances about trade gaps. No reply came, no apologies, no excuses, only empty channels. Across the rim sectors, colony stations that had once buzzed with Terran settlers fell silent. Laser plasma beacons blinked a slow funeral rhythm over empty landing bays. Cargo shipments remained on pallets, unopened, as if their handlers had simply dissolved into mist. On Velthar Prime, Councillor Dravik sent an envoy to the Terran embassy, demanding explanations. The envoy found the building dark, its carved basalt gates sealed tight. A single strip of black cloth had been hung from the entrance, fluttering in the dry thermal winds. No words, no crest, just the color of endings. Muttering about human melodrama, Dravik shrugged it off. They all shrugged it off. For a time, on the inner Concord channels, speculation grew. A Solvac admiral joked on a public feed, sipping some foul-smelling brew. Perhaps they finally realized their place. The council chambers laughed. The noise buzzed against the stone columns, false and hollow. Above the farthest gas giants, long-range surveillance detected an odd pattern. Human mining ships, agricultural vessels, even deep relay satellites gone, deleted from the star maps as though peeled off by invisible hands. When the Solvac trade minister tried reaching Earth's lunar coordination hub, the request returned a silent rejection pulse. No handshake, no dialogue. By the 4th standard week, a dull unease settled over the outer sectors. The Concord Navy Command issued a private advisory, suggesting Earth's colonies might be entering an isolationist phase. No military action was considered necessary. In the heart of Sol system, far from curious eyes, Tarn Vaylor stood in the observation ring of the Stratcom bastion. Below him, Earth's home fleet slipped into position, null-veiled hulls glinting faintly against the pulsing auroras. Inside the command nexus, laser plasma displays stitched the void with color-coded markers, blue for Earth assets, red for target nodes across Concord space. Tarn's gloved hand hovered over the primary activation console. Beside him, Kelric Jorn, Earth's chief weapons engineer, watched silently, the lines of his face etched deeper by sleepless nights. "Everything you asked for," Jorn said, voice low. Tarn did not look away from the displays. "Then there's no more to say." He keyed the sequence. Across the Sol system, relay nodes flared once, then dropped into blackout. The neural grid for Project Ashfall activated, threading invisible pathways across hyperspace lanes. Silent, swift, absolute, Tarn exhaled, the recycled air of the bastion thick with the scent of treated polymer and cooling conduits. The command staff, clad in charcoal flight suits, moved like ghost shadows behind him. No calls, no debates. The order had been long anticipated. On Velthar Prime, Counselor Dravik laughed as he signed off another report, dismissing Terran concerns. "Earth was always noise," he said, tossing the data slate onto his desk. "Now they've gone quiet. Good riddance." Out beyond the reach of Velthar's orbiting defense rings, hidden ships drifted in dark anchor, listening without broadcasting. Varen Koss monitored the planetary security channels, slipping invisible worms into their systems, draining data, bleeding dry every defense algorithm. No alarms triggered, no sirens howled, just silence. At the Council of Sectors, diplomats debated which species should inherit Earth's now vacated trading rights. Vecran envoys argued for resource shares. Solvac representatives demanded compensation for lost contracts. Karen generals, eager for new Dominion space, quietly proposed partitioning Earth's colonies under their banners. They did not notice that Earth's outposts had not been abandoned in haste, but stripped with careful calculated precision, down to the last encrypted buoy. In the deep listening posts orbiting Luthen Minor, technicians recorded an anomaly, small steady mass shadows near strategic Concord sites, moving without drive signatures. They logged the incident, flagged it low priority, and went back to sleep. On Earth behind the sealed blast doors of the bastion, Tarn Vaylor clasped his hands behind his back. Through the observation panels, the stars stretched cold and distant, smeared by the heavy-lensed distortion fields now active across Sol system. He turned to Kelric Jorn. "Deploy Phase 1. Kelric's fingers danced across the console. In hidden corners of the galaxy, silent pods opened like seeds under night soil, releasing slow waves of quantum shard mines across Concord's border stations. No noise, no warning, only absence, only the growing weight of a silence too large to name. The Concord, in all its arrogance, still laughed. "Initiate veil formation," Tarn Vaylor said. The words slicing through the command deck like a drawn blade. The control crews moved in unison. Heads-up displays across the walls pulsed from dormant blue to deep crimson. Strategic overlays unfolded like maps etched in fire. Outside the armored viewport, Earth's hidden fleet stirred. Vessels once camouflaged within asteroid fields and lunar craters now shed their disguises, black null-veil hulls absorbing every trace of light around them. Shapes the galaxy had forgotten, or never known, slipped free into open motion, silent predators uncoiling from ancient nests. Inside the bastion, the scent of heated wiring and polymer laced the cold, recycled air, mixing with the sharper tang of energy capacitors cycling to life. Tarn tapped a heads-up projection, dragging 3 glyphs into alignment. A slender line of data bled down the display. Ashfall, Phase 2, Execution. Kelric Jorn entered the command tier without ceremony, his dark coat wet from the mist of the upper hatches. He carried a slim data drive between 2 fingers, the casing humming faintly with contained charge. "Weapon cores stabilized," Jorn said, setting the drive onto the recessed console. "Cryo-pulse arrays show margin tolerance within spec. Margin is for the slow," Tarn replied. "Deploy full calibration." Jorn gave a grim smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. He keyed the upload. Across the outer solar staging points, Thousands of dormant weapon pods stirred, cryo-pulse torpedoes slotted into launch rails with bone-deep clicks, graviton lances folded into activation brackets, their focusing prisms glinting under maintenance drones' working lights. Every system bled readiness into the fleet's veins. On an auxiliary deck below, Varen Koss adjusted the neural threads in his gloves, each motion registering on the deep scan displays stacked before him. He leaned forward. "Link me to Concord primary relays," he ordered. A comms technician hesitated. "They're encrypted." Varen didn't blink. Not for long. He slid his hands over the sensory net, guiding invisible commands through the ship's quantum interface. Tendrils of code lanced into hyperspace, slithering between Concord firewalls with the ease of a knife through aging silk. Within minutes, major Concord communications backbones began misrouting essential data, requests for fleet deployments, repair orders, even basic supply chain dispatches, shuffled into dead loops, lost in endless confirmation cycles. Varen leaned back, flexing his fingers. "They'll choke on their own silence," he murmured. In the fleet armory bays, Jarek Solvin oversaw final munitions loadouts. The air reeked of dry coolant, and the brittle sharpness of polymer crates being split open. He checked each cargo sequence personally, gloved hands sweeping across the manifest projections, cryo-pulse stockpiles, graviton rounds, phased mines, all tagged, sealed and ready. "Nothing leaves my hold under quota," Jarek barked at the quartermaster. The young officer snapped a crisp nod, hustling to correct a slight deviation on a carrier manifest. Above them, supply barges drifted silently between dreadnoughts, their nav lights dimmed to whisper gleams. A fleet built for patience, for quiet fury, slowly awoke. In the Bastion's upper command tier, Tarn monitored the progressions, each display updated with rhythmic calm. Green-coded markers for successful deployments, gold for cybernetic infiltration points established. No red, not yet. He allowed himself a single breath through his nose, steady and thin. "Status on Blackwing squadrons." Drake Solvar's voice came sharp over the comms. "Shields integrated. Cloak drives at full efficiency." Tarn gave a slight nod to no one in particular. The planning had spanned decades. Ashfall was not a retaliatory tantrum, but a sharpened instrument of discipline, honed in the quiet hours humanity had endured under Concord's scorn. Tarn touched a secondary heads-up feed, watching real-time inserts from scattered field agents reporting in, embedded among Concord's frontier outposts, hidden among mercantile fleets, slotted within orbital construction crews. Each agent sent back a single wordless confirmation: ready. Above Earth, the Null Veil fleet realigned into spear formations, their black hulls warping the stars behind them into bruised smears of light. On Bastion's observation deck, Corvin Dax stood silently, arms crossed. He watched the final maneuvers without comment, the faint reflection of the Earth Seal banner pinned to the inner wall casting a long shadow across his features. Tarn approached, boots making no sound against the polished black composite flooring. "You're certain?" Tarn said quietly. Corvin didn't glance at him. "They weren't laughing at our weakness," he said. "They were laughing because they forgot history always remembers who teaches the lesson." Tarn gave a small grunt, something almost like approval. Below them, the final gravlifts sealed into docking racks. Cryopulse reactors came online one by one, each heartbeat of power slipping into the silent network, threading the fleet together. Kelric Jorn sent his final diagnostics, the data streams locking into synchronization without error. Varen Koss signaled the cyber war protocol's readiness with a simple hand flick through his neural interface. Jarek Solvin transmitted full armament status to the primary fleet commanders. Tarn Valor placed one hand on the fleet command relay. "Execute blackout deployment," he ordered. Silent detonations rippled outward from hidden Terran satellites, releasing quantum ghost clouds that would scatter long-range surveillance. Across Concord space, deep listening stations blinked into static confusion. Entire sectors of space flickered off the Concord's strategic maps. The veil was complete. The fleet slipped forward. Earth's heart beat cold and slow beneath them, steady as the forging of a storm. Tarn looked once more to Corvin. "No words," Tarn said, voice even. Corvin's reply was almost a whisper. "None needed." Beyond them, the stars shuddered, and the universe leaned closer, unknowingly standing at the edge of its final education. Execute. Tarnvaler's single word fell into the command nexus like a steel dagger. Across the dark reaches of Concord space, Earth's fleet moved. In the Dalvik sector, Concord Outpost 7's orbital watchman yawned, staring at a static-laden heads-up feed. The stars beyond the viewport shifted, just slightly, just wrong. A shiver crawled down his spine. Before the alarm could leave his throat, the sky fractured. Cryopulse torpedoes tore through the station's defense grid. Frost bloomed instantly across alloy walls, splintering them like brittle parchment. He reached for the alert beacon. His hand froze mid-air, skin turning crystalline blue. In the last instant before the nerve endings died, he watched his station shatter into drifting ice, each shard catching the weak sun in dying glints. Sector 1, gone. On the frontier rim of Slovakian command, Grand Admiral Resh Varn reclined in his tactical chair, grumbling at the slow logistics reports trickling across the fleet's laser plasma screens. He never saw them coming. Graviton lances sliced through the flagship's flank, hull plates screamed apart, molten metal twisting as artificial gravity imploded. Varn staggered upright, mouth open. The bridge cracked around him, the temperature swinging from searing heat to bone-deep chill in seconds. Another lance found the reactor core. The ship disintegrated inward, folding like crumpled paper. Sector 2, silenced. On Karin-controlled Proxima Minor, planetary defense platforms spun lazily above the equatorial belts, their patrols languid after months of peace. Quantum shard mines bloomed open just beneath their scanning range. The mines shimmered for a breath, translucent like soap bubbles, then phased through shields, detonating inside generator cores. The sky above the capital city turned white, then black. Sector 3, broken. On Bastion, Tarnvaler stood with arms crossed behind his back, watching the heads-up streams cascade updates faster than human reflexes could track. Icons of enemy positions winked out one after another, sharp and final. Varen Koss's voice cut through the tactical channel. All Concord comms blacked out, no signals escaping. Kelric Jorn's tone followed, clipped, weapon dispersal optimal, no human losses reported. Jarek Sullivan chimed in from Supply Command, reserve payloads untouched, requesting redeployment targets. Tarn nodded once, continue engagement. Across the burning remnants of Outpost 7, human assault wings moved in surgical arcs. Each ship slid through debris fields with uncanny grace, launching secondary payloads to disable remaining sensors. The air inside Concord Outpost turned razor-sharp, laced with vaporized wiring and the acrid bite of ruptured life support tanks. No distress calls escaped. On Solvak's capital moon, defenders scrambled ancient kinetic rail batteries, trying to lock targets. Earth's fighters evaded with ghost-like fluidity, slipping inside firing arcs and cutting power nodes before the batteries ever fully charged. Cryopulse warheads struck exposed infrastructure, freezing power conduits solid in microseconds. A single sharp gust of thermal expansion followed, then the conduits burst in brilliant white sprays, showering the surface with frozen debris. Alien soldiers collapsed mid-command as magnetic fields fried their neural implants. No orders completed. On Karin's orbital fields, commanders barked into dead channels, their voice relays swallowed by static. They fell back on ancient signal flares, launching them upward in desperation. The sky answered not with reinforcements, but with silence. Black null veil ships closed ranks, drifting like underwater predators, their cannons charging once more. In the Bastion Command Center, a new layer of heads-up streams displayed planetary surrenders. Emergency Concord fleets blinked onto tracking grids, only to vanish moments later, crushed before formations could fully lock. Tarnvaler leaned closer to the primary display. Begin tertiary wave deployment. Target strategic resource centers. Kelric Jorn keyed in new coordinates. Cryo-bombers peeled away from the main formation, descending toward planetary forges, orbital shipyards, and fleet dry docks. Over Velthar Prime, the Concorde's largest ship foundries detonated from within. Structures designed to birth battleships folded like broken accordions, littering the stratosphere with glowing wreckage. Heads-up displays throughout Concorde's territories dimmed, their feeds fragmenting into static mosaics. On the Bastion, Drake Solvar's status report crackled across the command line. Phase 2 complete. Primary opposition neutralized. Concord naval assets crippled. No emotion laced his voice. In the black reaches above Solvakian Sector Command, the remnants of an alien fleet tried to regroup, battered cruisers limping into a loose phalanx. Human vessels responded not with demands or ultimatums, but with pure methodical obliteration. Graviton lances flared again, catching a Solvak cruiser mid-escape. The beam sheared the ship cleanly, severing control decks from life support in a spray of boiling plasma. Cryo-torpedoes chased survivors, sealing breaches in sheets of frozen death. Across the broken sectors, the stars glittered cold and uncaring, reflecting the wreckage spinning silently between them. Tarn Valor issued the final orders without ceremony. No survivors in fleet sectors, no broadcast signatures, clean closure. At the very edge of Sol's system, fleet interceptors established perimeter screens, anchoring humanity's control tighter around their own sphere. Reinforcements stood ready in reserve, silent guardians awaiting new instructions. Back at the Galactic Concord Hall on Verdanus Prime, whispers began to crawl through the upper echelons. Minor clerks fidgeted under suddenly uncertain stars. Regional governors sent frantic pings to outposts that no longer answered. Commanders argued over outdated star maps, throwing blame like knives across the High Council floors. The Concord realized only too late that no protest, no diplomatic pressure, no massed fleet would answer their calls. Drop window green. Deploy shock formations, Marin Tavik ordered, voice flat against the rumble of the descent engines. The assault landers cut through the cloud layers like falling axes. Heads-up displays flickered status feeds across the visors of every shock trooper, packed shoulder to shoulder, armor plates hissing as atmospheric friction bled off the hulls. Below, the capital world of Varnak Prime stretched wide, once a bastion of Concord pride, now an open wound waiting for the blade. Tavik tightened the grip on his pulse cascade cannon, feeling the weapon hum with growing charge. He could taste the static in the recycled air, sharp as iron filings across his tongue. "Stand by for breach," came the call from his adjutant, Kaelv Drass. Tavik gave a nod he didn't realize he made. The landers hit dirt. Hatch ramps slammed down. Storm gray light flooded the interior. Tavik led the first wave into the shrieking chaos. Alien defenders scrambled to react, rifles swinging up too late. Pulse cascades detonated across their line, high-frequency blasts that tore through armor plating like brittle shells, leaving only broken bodies where soldiers had stood seconds before. Tavik moved fast, boots crunching over shattered stone tiles. He fired in short bursts, each shot carving brutal arcs through the defensive lines. Screams rose and cut off just as fast. From the upper terraces, Concord governors and their guards attempted to rally. Laser plasma banners flared as they issued desperate, garbled commands. Tavik didn't waste breath on warnings. His squad pivoted and swept the terrace with overlapping fields of fire. The banners burned. The governors fell, some still clutching ceremonial sigils as they crumpled to the scorched floor. Pulse scars, sharp blackened trails of devastation, etched themselves into the marble faces of the old monuments surrounding the council square. Statues that had once celebrated Concord's eternal order now leaned jagged and broken. A pair of Karin commanders attempted to stage a fallback at the eastern porticos, hurling infantry charges with outdated kinetic launchers. Tavik watched the incoming data streams pulse across his heads-up. "Shift flank left," he barked. Shock teams peeled off the main advance, darting across shattered causeways. Pulse fire shredded the Karin squads before they even completed their rally. Stone pillars collapsed inward, dust boiling up in choking waves. Tavik pressed forward. Every movement of his forces followed the same unrelenting pattern: pressure, breach, purge, secure. No time for speeches, no time for parley. The Concord had made their choice when they tore down the Earth Seal banner. Now Earth answered in full. Across the planet's secondary cities, ground crews dropped with equal fury. On the industrial world of Vrak, automated defense grids failed within minutes of contact. Varen Koss's cyber war teams had preemptively stripped them bare, leaving local command centers blind and deaf. On the agricultural hub of Selvek, human troopers moved through the dense thicket fields, pulse cannons setting fire to the engineered crops that once fed half the sector. The ash carried on the hot wind, biting into the skin of fleeing officials. Above the main broadcast spire, a battered Concorde major tried to signal for aid, dragging an outdated flare launcher into position. He never finished the ignition sequence. A shock sniper put a silent round through his crown from 600 meters. At the heart of Varnak Prime's command complex, Drex Valkor made his final stand. The Slovakian military commander was a brute of a being, armored in spiked battleplate, flanked by an honor guard wielding dual plasma axes. He rallied 200 of the last Concorde loyalists in a desperate crescent formation, barricading the main council entrance. From the scorched rooftops above, Tavik watched through zoom-locked optics. Valkor shouted into the wind, voice raw with desperation, "This is our world, you do not dictate our fate." Tavik keyed his comm. Grid 5, fire. 6 shock mortars thudded from concealed emplacements. Pulse cascade shells dropped into Valkor's formation, detonating in cones of concussive force that ruptured lungs, shattered reinforced armor, and threw the front ranks back like rag dolls. Valkor roared, charging forward through the smoke. He swung his axes wildly. Tavik stepped down from the platform, boots splashing into the bloodied runoff, pooling across the council plaza. Pulse cannon up, one squeeze. Valkor's left shoulder detonated outward, spinning the commander sideways. Another squeeze. The second shot cored through his torso, severing spine from pelvis. Valkor's body hit the stone with a wet crunch, his axes clattering free. The remaining Concorde guards broke formation, scattering like debris caught in a rising tide. Tavik moved across the plaza methodically, pausing only to adjust the power setting on his weapon. Shock troops followed, neutralizing pockets of resistance room by room. Atop the shattered dais of the council complex, Tavik planted a signal flare, its blue flame hissing upward, casting the ruined plaza in cold light. He keyed open his primary comm channel. Varnak Prime, secured. The reply came after a pause thick enough to taste. Tarn Valer's voice, quiet and iron-edged. Proceed to secondary objectives. No structure standing, no leader left breathing. Tavik gave a curt acknowledgement. Behind him, human engineers moved in, rigging demolition charges along the foundations of the remaining Concorde monuments. Pulse scars already marred the ancient walls, spiderwebs of blackened stone speaking in a language no envoy could misinterpret. Dominance, retribution, finality. As the charges detonated, the main Concorde monument, a towering statue of galactic unity, toppled, smashing through the council gates in a roar of broken stone and twisted rebar. The pieces lay scattered like bones, lit only by the dying embers of pulse fire, drifting through the smoky air. Across the captured cities, human flags bearing the Earth seal rose slowly into the bruised skies. There were no speeches broadcast to the galaxy, only the soft crackle of burning banners, and the silent understanding settling like ash across the ruins. The Concorde would never stand again. "Show me what's left," Tarn Valer said, his voice cold enough to frost the reinforced command glass. Kadrik Vaughn didn't answer. He simply keyed the heads-up relay, throwing the surveillance streams across the main bastion wall. The feeds unfurled in silence. Across Velthar Prime, a once proud council hall sagged under the weight of its shattered dome. Broken banners, still clinging to twisted masts, flapped weakly in a sluggish thermal breeze. The plaza where decrees of sovereignty had once echoed now hosted only scattered groups of survivors, huddled in the shadow of their ruined monuments. Earth's flag, bearing the restored seal, cast long shadows over them. Tarn leaned forward, hands resting on the cool steel of the observation rail. No words, no orders, just the slow tightening of the line across his mouth. On Selvek, drone footage swept low over scorched fields. The engineered crops had turned to skeletal rows of ash. In the gutted cities beyond, Concorde civilians scrambled through wreckage, gathering what little remained. A cracked mural of the great Concorde unity stood amid the ruins, a single fissure running straight through its center, splitting every species depicted there in two. The room remained heavy with unspoken judgment. Fleet Admiral Drake Solvar stepped up beside Tarn, his boots quiet against the polished deck. "They're trying to reorganize local governance," he said, tapping a laser plasma control stick. "Small conclaves, no coordinated resistance." Tarn studied the feed. The small fires, the white flags sewn hurriedly from torn council robes. The hollow-eyed children staring at Earth's patrols passing through their streets without pause. The cost was measured in silence, not in screams. On Varnak Prime, Maron Tavik's forces moved with brutal efficiency, rooting out the last hidden command centers. Surveillance showed Drex Valkor's shattered body, still pinned under the fallen Unity statue, untouched, a grim monument to the futility of the old Concord's pride. Tarn let the images spool out before him. He wanted them remembered. In another feed, a Solvac outpost surrendered in full. No shots, no fanfare, just ragged soldiers laying their arms at the feet of human officers, hands trembling in the thin, dusty air. Kadrik Vaughn shifted slightly, his face impassive. "They'll comply," Vaughn said. "Nothing left to rally around." Tarn nodded once, the movement tight as a coiled spring. Corvin Dax entered the command deck, rain streaking his diplomatic coat from the journey topside. He said nothing at first, just moved to stand beside Tarn, taking in the devastation. "Is this how you imagined it would end?" Solvar asked quietly, a rare edge of weariness in his voice. Corvin didn't blink. "No," he answered. "But it's how it had to." In the surveillance streams, the broken council chambers lay open to the elements. Storm water coursed through their shattered thresholds. Birds nested in the splintered rafters, indifferent to the history soaked into the stones beneath them. The camera panned across one counselor's chair, its once gilded frame bent inward by the heat of the initial strike, symbols of authority charred into illegibility. Earth had offered peace. They had answered with mockery. This was the cost of that choice. Further down the streams, bodies lined the cracked avenues leading into once thriving diplomatic quarters. Some clutched relics of office, others crude weapons of defiance abandoned in the mud. None resisted now. At the Bastion's main command dais, a secondary feed lit up, showing encoded transmissions from secondary Concord sectors. Emergency broadcast beacons, silent, unanswered. Requests for surrender terms, stacked and ignored. Tarn dismissed them with a flick of his hand. "We answer when we're ready," he said. Kelric Jorn, standing at an auxiliary station, tightened his jaw. "We broke the body," he said. "Now they learn to live with the scars." Outside the Bastion, the Null Veil fleets maintained orbit, darkened silhouettes stitched against the wheeling stars. Earth's control was absolute, yet not a single broadcast announced victory. No Earth leader made a declaration. No grand banners unfurled in triumph. The silence itself became the monument. Back in the shattered worlds, Concord survivors slowly moved through the remains of their empires, whispering prayers to gods that had never saved them, building crude shrines of stone and burnt cloth. Tavik's reports trickled in. City after city, world after world, broken, subdued, changed forever. Inside the command center, Corvin unfolded the Earth Seal banner across the conference table. The fabric, once desecrated, now clean and whole again, rippled faintly in the cooled air. Every eye in the room turned toward it. Tarn said nothing. He didn't have to. The message was written into every scar, every toppled monument, every surrendered city. Humanity had not risen from weakness. It had risen from patience. And now the galaxy would remember that patience was a choice. Not a limit, not anymore. Outside the Bastion, the night deepened. The stars burned cold, ancient witnesses to the turning of a new age. In the ruins below, where Concord banners smoldered against blackened earth, a new silence took root, heavy, enduring, absolute. And though no words were spoken, every survivor across the broken councils understood the truth seared into the bones of their worlds. Humanity had been merciful once. They would not need to be again. "Time," Tarn Vaylor said simply, eyes steady on the primary relay. Corvin Dax adjusted the black diplomatic coat draped over his shoulders, the fabric still damp with rain from the upper levels. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The command deck behind him remained silent as he descended the platform steps. Outside the Bastion, storm fronts rolled across the fractured skyline of Verdanus Prime. The rain that fell now wasn't the sharp, biting kind that heralded war. It was slow, heavy, washing blood into the broken gutters. Corvin walked alone, his boots striking against shattered causeways littered with fragments of banners, armor, and fallen stones. Each step left shallow impressions in the wet dust, filling almost instantly as the rain smeared the traces of passage. The Earth Seal banner rested in his arms, folded with care, its fabric catching stray droplets but never sagging. The ruins of the Concord Hall loomed ahead, once a symbol of galactic unity, now a carcass of splintered stone and twisted alloy beams. The grand pillars that had flanked the hall's entrance stood broken, jagged fingers reaching into a colorless sky. Corvin crossed the threshold. Inside, the main floor stretched wide and desolate, water pooled in uneven slabs where the ceiling had collapsed. The carved murals along the walls, once depicting great victories of dozens of species, were now reduced to streaks of ash and fractured images. He moved forward. Every sound, the scrape of his soles against cracked tile, the distant rattle of wind through broken windows, rang hollow in the open silence. The dais still stood, or what remained of it, a slanted platform tilted sideways by the structural collapse, a gaping hole where the speaker's emblem had once crowned it. Corvin paused at the foot of the dais. The Earth Seal banner remained steady in his grasp. He climbed the broken steps, the rain slicking the stone beneath his boots. His free hand brushed along the jagged edge of the platform, drawing a thin line of red across his palm. He didn't flinch. At the center of the ruined dais he knelt. The air smelled of wet ash and cooling dust, thick and raw in the back of his throat. Without a word, Corvin unfolded the Earth Seal banner. The deep indigo cloth caught the sparse light filtering through the shattered ceiling, gleaming faintly against the scorched backdrop. The silver-threaded emblem at its center, earth cradled by laurel branches, seemed to glow untouched by the ruins surrounding it. With careful, deliberate motions, he spread the banner across the broken speaker's stand. The fabric settled softly, the only motion in a world frozen by loss. Corvin rose. He stepped back, boots grinding against rubble, and stood still. No counselors, no guards, no cameras, only the broken remnants of the once mighty Concord, peering from the shadows of collapsed balconies and shattered doorways, watching him with hollow, terrified eyes. Corvin turned his gaze across the hall. He saw them, the few survivors, too afraid to move, too stunned to speak. He didn't acknowledge them. Instead, he reached up, drawing the rain-slick hood of his coat over his head, shadowing his face. He lingered for a heartbeat longer, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then he turned. Each step back across the ruined floor echoed like a funeral bell. When he passed under the shattered archway, the wind caught the edge of the Earth Seal banner. It fluttered once, snapping sharply, and then settled, alone, defiant, eternal. Corvin didn't look back. Outside, the rain thickened, washing the blood and soot from the cracked stones. Humanity had no need to stay. The memory would. Far behind him, inside the council hall, the survivors did not move. They stayed where they were, silent witnesses to a burial no words could honor, no future could erase. Above the ruins, Earth's patrol ships hovered silently, null-veiled forms drifting like black sentinels against the roiling clouds. They made no sound, fired no weapons. The message had already been delivered. Corvin moved down the broken thoroughfares, alone under the darkening sky. Every banner the Concord had ever flown now lay in shreds, soaked and forgotten. Only one remained whole, and it flew not from a mast or a palace rooftop, but from the heart of the ruin, the Earth Seal, steady and unbending amid the bones of arrogance. At the first crossroads, a human strike team waited. They stood back as Corvin approached, weapons lowered, visors dark. He passed them without speaking. Behind him, the lead officer lifted a small relay device and tapped it once. Silent confirmation. Mission complete. Corvin reached the waiting transport at the edge of the ruined city. The ramp descended with a hydraulic sigh. He stepped aboard without hesitation. Inside, the air carried the faint charge of filtered rainwater and the bitter tang of scorched polymer, sharp, clean, free of death. As the hatch sealed behind him, Corvin stood before the laser plasma display showing the retreat vectors of the human fleet. The lines were simple, direct: leave nothing more. He watched the streams adjust in real time, each fleet element pulling away from occupied sectors, each ground team withdrawing from shattered capitals. "Pull them out," Tarnvaler said, his voice sharp against the cold air inside the Bastion's observation deck. Across the heads-up displays, fleet trajectories recalculated. Earth's ships, silent as deep-water predators, peeled away from occupied systems in flawless formations, leaving no mark but the fear they seeded. Corvin Dax watched without speaking, arms crossed, his figure a shadow against the viewport's faint light. He didn't look at the streams of retreating data. His gaze stayed fixed on the broken line of Verdana's prime skyline, where the Concord Hall still sagged like a corpse on a pike. Below, survivors stumbled through reconstruction efforts. New walls were raised where old monuments once towered. No banners flew, no councils gathered, only empty-eyed citizens stacking stone on stone, as if rebuilding could erase the lessons carved into their bones. Drones hovered above them, silent watchers bearing no flag but their own unyielding shadow. On Velthor Prime, the central assembly plaza had become a field of ghost fires. Statues half rebuilt were abandoned again, rain cutting long scars down their marble faces. Children played in the rubble where senators once dictated treaties. None wore the colors of the old Concord. They wore nothing at all, as if even allegiance had turned to ash. Everywhere Earth had passed, silence followed. At scattered way stations across the rim worlds, survivors erected crude shrines to forgotten leaders. None dared build one for themselves. None dared imagine that forgiveness could be bought with stones or prayers. Human patrols moved between cities at random intervals, their armor dull against the ash-heavy winds, their movements unhurried. They never spoke unless required. They never lingered longer than necessary. They didn't need to. The galaxy understood. Inside the bastion, the final withdrawal protocols blinked across the heads-up relays. Fleet Admiral Drake Sulvar nodded once at Tarn. No pursuit, no escalation. They're broken. Tarn folded his hands behind his back. Let them stay broken. Corvin stepped away from the viewport. They'll rebuild, Sulvar said, voice low, almost thoughtful. They'll remember what built them, Corvin replied. No one answered. Far across the sectors, abandoned Concord garrisons crackled with wind and dust. Trade routes shifted slowly around the scars left behind. Merchant fleets turned their charts away from once busy hubs, adjusting silently to the new voids on the maps. On Selvek, a shattered mural bore fresh carvings. They didn't celebrate peace. They warned of silence. On Vrake, the old legislative chambers had been converted into storage houses. The few remaining ministers took their oaths not before statues, but before the charred remains of their own broken laws. The galaxy was no longer the one that had mocked the humans. It was a galaxy of watchfulness, a galaxy of memory. Earth's outposts stood across captured worlds, quiet as tombstones, their sensor arrays sweeping endlessly across the empty roads, the abandoned launch pads, the new fields. The survivors lived under no formal occupation. They lived under the weight of the unseen. In time, stories spread, whispers in refugee camps, murmurs across black markets, tales traded in the back rooms of merchant guilds. They spoke of a banner carried into a broken hall, of a man who placed it there with no words, no demands, of fleets that came from nowhere and left nothing but silence in their wake. They spoke of how, when humanity was insulted, they did not rage, they waited, and when they struck, they taught. The cost of forgetting, the cost of arrogance. The galaxy learned that Earth's patience had been a gift all along, and gifts once refused are never offered twice. Inside the bastion, Kadric Vaughn finalized the last transmission. No threat, no invitation, only a record, a silent ledger of actions taken, of debts paid. Tarn watched him finish, then turned to Corvin. Do you regret it? Corvin looked at the stars beyond the viewport, their cold fire unchanging. No, he said quietly. They chose their memory. Tarn nodded once. Corvin glanced down at the relay pad in his hand. The Earth Seal banner shimmered briefly across it, a simple insignia woven by hands that had long since passed into history. It was never about conquest. It was about dignity, about the price of stripping it away. He closed the relay. Outside, the fleets fell back to Earth's defensive borders, tightening their patrols but making no further strikes. It wasn't needed. The work was done. In the ruins of Verdani's Prime, a child climbed the broken dais where the banner remained. He touched the fabric with tentative fingers, then stepped back, head bowed, as if sensing the weight stitched into every thread. From the cracked windows of shattered council towers, surviving elders watched the human outposts glint against the dark clouds, their forms still and watchful, and they remembered. Not the fleets, not the weapons, but the silence, the unforgiving, absolute silence that had ended their world. On Bastion's main deck, as the last reports blinked into the archive, Tarn Valor allowed himself a rare breath of closure. History, he said quietly, doesn't ask permission. Corvin's mouth curved into something almost like a smile. No, he said, it only remembers who spoke loudest without raising a voice. And as the Bastion turned on its long arc back toward Earth, as the conquered worlds grew smaller in the distance, the stars bore silent witness to a new reality. The galaxy was no longer ruled by noise, it was ruled by the memory of silence. A silence born when humanity, mocked and insulted, chose not to argue, not to plead, but to remind. And in doing so, they taught the universe the lesson it would never dare forget. The universe never knew fear, until humans lost their cool.